My son looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Mom, apologize right now or leave my house." The room went silent. I stood up slowly from the beige sofa, the one I had helped them choose years ago when the place was still empty and full of promise. My knees trembled, but I refused to let them see it. Every pair of eyes in that living room was fixed on me, judging, waiting, measuring my worth in that single moment. My daughter-in-law smiled. It was not a nervous smile or an uncomfortable one. It was small, controlled, and confident. The kind of smile someone gives when they believe the battle is already over. That smile did something to me. My name is Evelyn Brooks. I am 69 years old, and until that afternoon, I believed there were some lines a child would never cross with their mother. I was wrong. We were standing in the living room of my son Daniel's house in suburban Ohio, the house I had paid for, the house I had signed over to him with shaking hands and a proud heart, telling myself that a mother's job was to give without counting the cost. That day, I was being accused of theft. Lauren, my daughter-in-law, claimed I had stolen a bracelet that belonged to her family, a so-called heirloom. She said it disappeared during a small family gathering the week before and that she had just found it inside my handbag. Inside my bag. Right there on the coffee table, she opened my purse and pulled it out. A thin silver bracelet with a small stone that caught the light. I remember staring at it, feeling as if the floor had dropped away beneath my feet. I had never seen that bracelet in my life. Daniel stood frozen beside her, his face flushed, his jaw tight. This was the same boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. The same boy who cried in my arms when his father died. The same boy I worked myself sick to raise. Now he was looking at me like he did not know who I was. "Mom, just say you're sorry," he said, his voice sharp with embarrassment. "Let's not make this worse than it already is." Worse. Lauren's parents sat across from me, watching quietly. Her mother shook her head slowly, as if in disappointment. Her father crossed his arms. No one spoke up for me. No one questioned the story. Not one person asked how a woman who had given everything to her child could suddenly become a thief. I felt something crack inside my chest. I looked at Daniel and realized that this was not about a bracelet. This was about loyalty. About who he chose to believe when it mattered most. I tried to speak, but my voice came out unfamiliar, thin and steady, in a way that surprised even me. I told him I did not take anything. I told him I would never steal from him or anyone else. I reminded him who I was. He did not answer. Instead, he sighed, the way people do when they think someone is being difficult on purpose. "Mom," he said again, "apologize to Lauren's family or leave. I'm not doing this in my own house." My house. The words echoed in my head. I looked around at the walls I had paid for, the floors I had chosen, the space I had imagined my future grandchildren playing in. In that moment, I understood something painful and permanent. Once certain words are spoken, they can never be taken back. Lauren's smile grew just a fraction wider. I picked up my purse. The same purse she had just humiliated me with, and held it close to my chest. I felt small, but I refused to bend. I met Lauren's eyes and saw something cold and calculating behind them. This was not a misunderstanding. It was a trap, and I had walked straight into it. I took a breath and said 3 words. "You will regret this." I did not yell. I did not cry. My voice was calm, almost quiet. But the smile on Lauren's face disappeared instantly. Daniel opened his mouth as if to say something, maybe to stop me, maybe to explain. I did not wait. I turned and walked toward the door. No one followed me. I didn't take the elevator down. I walked the stairs, one slow step at a time, holding the railing so I would not fall apart where they could see me. By the time I reached the sidewalk, my chest hurt and my vision blurred. I had given my son my life, and in return he had just thrown me out of it. As I stood there alone, the afternoon sun warm on my face, I had no idea that this moment would set off a chain of events that would change everything. I did not yet know that the truth would come out, that my son would one day stand at my door desperate and broken. All I knew was this: that afternoon, I lost my son, and something else was born in his place. Before I was the woman standing on the sidewalk with nowhere to go, I was a wife. And then, very suddenly, I was a widow. Daniel was 12 years old when his father died. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday morning. My husband Mark had just finished his coffee and was tying his work boots when he collapsed on the kitchen floor. A massive heart attack. No warning, no time to prepare. By the time the ambulance arrived, he was already gone. I remember Daniel screaming. I remember holding him so tightly, my arms ached, promising him everything would be okay, even though I had no idea how I would keep that promise. I was 39 years old with a grieving child, a small rented apartment, and no steady income. There was no insurance payout large enough to save us, no relatives with money, just me, a stack of unpaid bills, and the reality that I could not afford to fall apart. I found work wherever I could. At first, I cleaned offices at night. Then I started repairing furniture for neighbors, sanding old tables, fixing loose chairs, sewing curtains, and mending upholstery by hand. I discovered I was good with my hands. I learned to stretch fabric, measure twice, cut once. People started calling me when they needed something fixed instead of thrown away. Every dollar went into keeping Daniel fed, clothed, and in school. He grew up to the sound of my tools and sewing machine. He learned early not to ask for things I could not afford. On weekends, he helped me carry supplies or load furniture into borrowed trucks. He never complained. Instead, he hugged me and told me I was the strongest person he knew. When Daniel was 17, he was accepted into a state university. He was so proud he cried when the letter arrived. I cried too, but for a different reason. The tuition numbers terrified me. I took on more work. I woke up before sunrise and went to bed long after midnight. My hands were always sore. My back ached constantly. I skipped doctor appointments, new clothes, vacations. I told myself rest could wait. What could not wait was my son's future. I paid for his education in full, every semester, every book, every fee. I never told him how much it cost because I did not want him to feel guilty. I wanted him to focus on becoming the man his father never got to see. When Daniel graduated, I stood in the crowd holding my breath as he walked across the stage. He smiled when he spotted me, and in that moment, every sleepless night felt worth it. After college, he got a good job. Not glamorous, but stable. He moved back in with me to save money. He insisted on paying part of the rent, and I accepted. But I quietly put most of it aside for him. I never told him. A mother does not keep score. Years later, when he met Lauren, I was relieved. She was polite, well-spoken, and seemed grateful for everything Daniel had. When they talked about getting married but worried about money, I did not hesitate. I paid for the wedding. When they talked about buying a home but could not afford a down payment, I did not hesitate. I emptied my savings and bought the house Daniel now called his own. I told myself I did not need much. A small apartment was enough for me. Knowing my son was secure was my reward. I believed love was measured by sacrifice. I believed that if I gave enough, I would always have a place in my son's life. Standing outside that house years later, holding my purse with shaking hands, I realized how wrong I had been. Because everything I had given him had slowly become invisible. And the woman who had never lifted a finger for his future had convinced him that I was the problem. That realization hurt more than the accusation ever could. But I did not yet know how deep the betrayal went, or how much it would cost all of us before the truth finally came out. When Daniel first brought Lauren home, I truly believed my prayers had been answered. She was warm, attentive, and careful with her words. She complimented my cooking, asked about my work, and called me Mrs. Brooks with a sweetness that felt sincere. When she hugged me goodbye that first evening, she whispered, "Thank you for raising such a good man." I went to bed that night smiling. After they married, nothing seemed wrong at first. Daniel worked long hours, and Lauren talked often about their plans for the future. A bigger house someday. Children. Travel. I listened quietly and nodded, happy just to be included. The changes came slowly, almost invisibly. It started after Daniel received a major promotion. His hours increased, his income doubled, and suddenly money was no longer a constant worry. That was when Lauren began to shift. She started making small comments, harmless on the surface, but sharp if you listened closely. "Mom, you work too hard. Don't you ever think about slowing down? Daniel worries you push yourself too much. He just wants you to rest. You know, Daniel thinks you hold on to the past too tightly." She always spoke for him. If I tried to bring something up directly with my son, she would smile and say, "Oh, he's just stressed from work. Don't take it personally." Or, "He didn't mean it like that." You know how you can be sensitive. Over time, I began to doubt myself. Lauren started rearranging our family routines. Sunday lunches became shorter. Then they became rare. When I did come over, Lauren would already have plans with friends or her parents. "I was always welcome," she said, but the air felt heavy when I stayed too long. Daniel grew quieter around me. Our phone calls became brief. When I asked about his day, he gave short answers. When I shared something about my life, he seemed distracted. Lauren was always nearby, always listening. Once, I overheard her say, "Mom just doesn't understand our lifestyle now. She's from a different time, a different time." She began criticizing things she once praised. My food was too simple. My clothes were outdated. My stories were repetitive. Each comment was small enough to dismiss, but together they formed a wall I could not climb. The worst part was how subtly she positioned herself between Daniel and me. If I called him, she would answer and say he was busy. If I texted, she replied for him. If I suggested meeting alone, she laughed and said, "Why the secrecy? We're family." But we were not equal. I watched as Daniel grew closer to Lauren's parents. They were always present, always included. They traveled together. They celebrated holidays together. I was invited, but I felt like an afterthought. When I tried to talk to Daniel about it, he brushed it off. "Mom, you're imagining things. Lauren loves you. You just need to give her space." Space. That word became his answer to everything. Space when I felt lonely. Space when I felt dismissed. Space when I felt replaced. I began to step back, telling myself I was being dramatic, that this was what letting go looked like, that a good mother did not interfere. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. Love does not make you feel small. Love does not erase you slowly while smiling to your face. By the time I realized I was being pushed out, Lauren no longer had to try. Daniel had already learned to see me the way she did, as unnecessary, outdated, in the way. And I still had no idea how far she was willing to go to make sure I disappeared completely. The invitation came on a Thursday afternoon. Lauren called me herself, her voice unusually warm. She said her parents were visiting for the weekend, and she wanted to host a small family dinner. Nothing formal. Just us, she said, a chance to reconnect. I hesitated. Something in my chest tightened, the quiet warning I had learned to ignore over the years. But when she added, "Daniel would really like you there," I agreed. I wanted to believe my son still needed me. The dinner was on Saturday. I arrived early, as I always did, carrying a simple dessert I had made that morning. The house looked perfect, too perfect. Every surface gleamed. The air smelled faintly of candles and expensive food. Lauren greeted me with a long hug and took my coat. Daniel smiled, but his eyes slid away quickly, already tired, already distant. Her parents arrived shortly after. Polite, reserved, observant. Dinner itself was tense but quiet. Conversation stayed on safe topics: work ads, weather, travel plans. No laughter, no warmth. I felt like I was sitting in someone else's life. After the main course, Lauren clapped her hands lightly and said we should all step outside to see the new lights they had installed in the backyard. She turned to me and smiled. "Mom, would you mind staying inside for a minute and keeping an eye on things while we're out there? It'll only be a moment." I nodded without thinking. Everyone filed out, laughter drifting back through the open door. I stood alone in the living room, listening to their voices fade, feeling foolish for standing guard in a house that was not mine. I remember adjusting the cushions on the sofa, straightening a picture frame. I did not move from that room. 10 minutes later, they came back inside. Lauren's face changed instantly. She stopped short and looked around, then rushed toward the bedroom hallway. Moments later, she returned holding a small velvet box, her hands shaking. "My bracelet is gone," she said, her voice breaking. "The one my mother gave me." Her mother gasped. Her father frowned. Daniel looked confused. "What bracelet?" he asked. "The heirloom," Lauren said, tears already forming. "I had it in my jewelry box. I checked this morning. Now it's gone." The room filled with tension. I felt my stomach drop. I tried to reassure her, telling her maybe it had been misplaced, that we could all look together. Lauren nodded, wiping her eyes. Yes, maybe someone took it by accident. She looked at me then. "Mom," she said softly, "you were the only one inside while we were outside." The words hung in the air. Daniel turned toward me. His expression shifted, not accusatory yet, but uncertain. The kind of uncertainty that hurts more than anger. "Did you see anyone go into the bedroom?" he asked. "No," I said immediately. "I stayed right here." Lauren's mother folded her arms. Her father said nothing. Lauren took a breath, as if forcing herself to be brave. "I hate to even suggest this," she said, "but maybe we should check bags, just to rule it out." I laughed in disbelief. "Check bags?" Daniel hesitated. Lauren reached out and touched his arm. "I need peace of mind," she whispered. "Please." He did not look at me when he nodded. Lauren walked straight to the chair where my handbag rested. She picked it up before I could react. "Lauren, stop," I said. "This is ridiculous." She ignored me and opened my bag on the coffee table. Slowly, carefully. She took out my wallet, my keys, a folded tissue. Then she stopped. Her fingers closed around something silver. The bracelet. Her mother cried out. Her father stood up. Daniel went pale. Lauren stared at it as if she could not believe what she was seeing. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Why would you do this?" I felt like I had been struck. I did not scream. I did not faint. I stood there frozen, staring at the object I had never seen before in my life, now sitting in my purse like a verdict. I told them it was impossible, that someone must have put it there, that I would never steal from my own family. Daniel's voice broke. "Mom, it was in your bag." Lauren collapsed into his arms, crying. Her parents looked at me with quiet disgust. Then came the words that ended everything. "Evelyn," Lauren's mother said calmly, "I think you owe my daughter an apology." I looked at my son, waiting for him to defend me. Instead, he said it. "Mom, apologize or leave." And in that moment, I understood the truth. The trap had worked perfectly, and I had just lost my place in my son's life without ever standing a chance. I did not go home that night and sleep. I sat on the edge of my narrow bed, still wearing my coat, my purse clutched in my lap, staring at the wall as if it might explain how my life had collapsed so quietly. The room felt smaller than it ever had before. The ticking of the clock grew louder with every minute. Humiliation does something strange to the mind. At first, it makes you replay every moment, searching for the exact second you could have said something differently. Then it turns into doubt. Maybe I missed something. Maybe I forgot. Maybe I am losing my memory. That thought terrified me more than the accusation. By morning, my eyes were swollen and my body ached, but something else had settled inside me. Not rage, not revenge, clarity. If Lauren had been bold enough to humiliate me in front of my own son, then this was not an emotional mistake. It was calculated. And calculated people leave trails. I made myself a cup of coffee and pulled out an old storage box from under my bed. Inside were documents I had not touched in years. Bank statements, receipts, contracts, notes written in my own careful handwriting. My life, organized in paper. I spread everything across the table and began to sort. College tuition payments, wedding expenses, the house purchase. I remembered every sacrifice as clearly as the numbers printed beside them. By noon, I had filled 3 neat piles. What stunned me was not the amount of money. It was how easily it had all been forgotten. I had never once used those sacrifices as leverage, never reminded my son what I had given. I believed love did not need proof. Now I understood that silence without boundaries invites erasure. As I worked, something else began to bother me: the bracelet. Lauren had claimed it was a family heirloom, priceless, irreplaceable. But I remembered how casually she wore it, how recently it appeared, how quickly she knew exactly where it was, and the way she reached for my bag without hesitation. I picked up my phone and scrolled back through old messages. Photos, dates, patterns I had ignored before suddenly stood out. Expensive purchases, trips, spa visits, things that did not align with what Daniel had once confided about their finances. A quiet unease settled in my stomach. That afternoon, I did something I had never done before. I asked for help. I scheduled a consultation with a lawyer, not to attack, but to understand where I stood. I needed to know if the woman I had become, the one who had given everything away, still had any ground left to stand on. The lawyer listened carefully, flipping through my documents without interrupting. When he looked up, His expression was no longer neutral. "Mrs. Brooks," he said, "you didn't just help your son. You funded his entire adult life." He explained my options slowly, clearly. Nothing dramatic, no guarantees, just facts. Facts were grounding. As I left his office, I did not feel victorious. I felt steady. For the first time since that Saturday night, my breathing slowed. I was not powerless. I was uninformed before. That was different. On the walk home, I passed a small storefront I had never noticed. The sign in the window was plain and unassuming. Private investigations. Confidential. I stopped. Lauren had taught me one lesson I would never forget. If someone is willing to destroy you quietly, the only way to survive is to learn the truth quietly as well. I stepped inside. And with that decision, everything began to change. The investigator called me 6 days later. His voice was calm, professional, almost detached. He asked if I could come by his office that afternoon. Not tomorrow, not next week. That afternoon. My hands shook as I put on my coat. I had spent those 6 days in a strange state of suspension, sewing small repair jobs to keep my mind occupied, sleeping in short stretches, waking up with the same image burned into my thoughts. Lauren standing over my open purse, Daniel looking at me like I was someone he no longer recognized. When I arrived, the investigator slid a thin folder across the desk. He did not speak right away. I opened it. What I saw made my chest tighten. Lauren's financial records were worse than I imagined. Multiple credit cards, all maxed out. Months of minimum payments. Late notices. Interest piling up. The spending was relentless. Designer clothing. Luxury salons. Weekend trips. All charged quietly, steadily, while Daniel worked longer hours believing he was building a future. The numbers did not lie. Then came the bracelet. The investigator tapped one page with his finger. He had traced the item to a resale boutique less than 10 miles from Daniel's house. Purchased less than 3 months before the dinner. Not an heirloom. Not priceless. Not inherited. Bought. Cheap enough to replace. Valuable enough to weaponize. I felt something cold move through me. Her mother was not dead. She was very much alive, retired, living comfortably. The story about the bracelet being passed down through generations was fiction, crafted carefully, repeated often enough to feel real, and Daniel believed every word. There was more. Lauren had recently opened a separate account Daniel did not know about. Large cash withdrawals had been made over the past several months. Quiet transfers. No explanation. She was preparing an exit. The investigator leaned back in his chair and said something that stayed with me. People who create scenes like the one you described don't do it once. They rehearse. They plan. And they leave when the truth gets too close. I left his office in a daze. The betrayal was deeper than I thought. This was not just about pushing me out. This was about control. About isolating Daniel. About draining him while making me the villain. I did not rush to confront anyone. I returned home and sat at my kitchen table, the folder closed in front of me, my hands folded neatly on top. For the first time in my life, I felt something I had never allowed myself to feel before. Power. Not the loud kind. Not the kind that demands attention. The quiet kind that comes from knowing the truth while others are still pretending. I went back to the lawyer. This time, I placed the investigator's report beside my documents. He read slowly, carefully, then looked up at me with a different expression than before. "Mrs. Brooks," he said, "this changes everything." He explained what could be done. Notices, legal pressure, Consequences, not revenge. Accountability. We drafted a formal letter addressed to Daniel. Calm, factual, supported by evidence. No accusations. No insults. Just the truth. It would be delivered to his workplace. I did not warn him. I did not call. I did not send a message. Silence, I had learned, was not weakness. It was preparation. As the letter was sent, I sat alone in my apartment, listening to the familiar hum of my sewing machine, wondering how long it would take for reality to catch up to the story Lauren had told. I did not have to wait long, because the kind of lies built on manipulation always collapse. And when they do, they take everything with them. It was almost 10 o'clock at night when someone knocked on my door. Not a polite knock. Not a neighbor. It was frantic, uneven, the sound of someone who had run out of options. When I opened the door, Daniel was standing there. He looked smaller somehow. His shoulders slumped, his clothes wrinkled, his eyes red and hollow like he had not slept in days. For a moment, I barely recognized him. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking. "Please, I need to talk to you." I stepped aside without a word. The apartment felt painfully quiet as he walked in. The same small space he used to complain was too cramped, too old, too modest. Now it was the only place he had left. He did not sit right away. He stood there twisting his hands, breathing hard as if holding himself together required effort. "She's gone," he finally said. I waited. "Lauren left this morning. She emptied the joint account, took her things, left a note." His voice cracked on the last word. He told me everything spilled out after that. How he had received the legal letter at work and felt the ground shift under his feet. How he confronted Lauren that night. How she laughed at first, then snapped when he showed her the evidence. "She admitted it, Mom. The bracelet. All of it. She said she had to make me choose. That there was no room for you in the life she wanted." Daniel sank into the chair and covered his face. "I believed her. I believed her over you." The silence between us was heavy. He looked up at me then, truly looked at me, and I saw something I had not seen in a long time. Fear. Not of losing money, not of losing status. Fear of having destroyed the one relationship he could not replace. "I'm sorry," he said. "I don't expect forgiveness. I didn't know where else to go." I sat across from him and folded my hands. "Daniel," I said quietly, "love does not disappear because someone apologizes, but trust does not return just because someone is desperate." He nodded, tears sliding down his face. I told him the truth. That being accused hurt. That being humiliated hurt more. But being dismissed, erased, and replaced was what nearly broke me. I told him I would not scream. I would not punish. But I would not pretend. "You don't get to come back to me because your life fell apart," I said. "You come back because you understand what you did." He listened, really listened. Then I gave him my terms. He would take responsibility for the life he had built on my sacrifices. He would stop blaming others. He would face the consequences without asking me to rescue him again. I would withdraw the legal action. But he would rebuild on his own. No money from me, no shortcuts, no pretending the past never happened. He nodded again and again. "I understand, Mom. I swear I do." When he stood to leave, he paused at the door. "I lost everything," he said softly. I met his eyes. "No, Daniel. You lost the illusion. What you do next will decide whether you lose your character, too." As the door closed behind him, I felt something settle in my chest. For the first time, I was not afraid of losing my son. Because now, he finally understood what it meant to lose a mother. 6 months passed after that night. Life did not suddenly become easy, but it became honest. Daniel sold the house. Not because a court forced him to, because he finally understood what it represented. A life built too fast, on money he did not earn, on sacrifices he never truly saw. He paid off the debts Lauren had left behind and moved into a smaller place farther from the city. No prestige, no illusion, just something he could afford on his own income. He did not complain. That was how I knew the lesson had finally reached him. He started coming by on Sundays. Not every time at first. Sometimes just to drop off groceries. Sometimes just to sit quietly and drink coffee. He listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, it was not to justify himself, but to reflect. I watched my son learn things no promotion had ever taught him. How to cook for himself, how to clean, how to sit with discomfort instead of running from it, how to live without someone managing his image for him. Most importantly, he learned how fragile trust really is. As for me, I did not change my life in dramatic ways. I still live in the same small apartment. I still work with my hands. I still wake up early. But something inside me is different. I no longer measure my worth by how much I give away. I no longer stay silent to keep the peace. I learned that love without respect is not love. It is slow self-destruction. For years, I believed being a good mother meant enduring everything, being patient, being invisible when necessary. I thought boundaries were selfish, that asking for respect would make me seem cold. I was wrong. Boundaries are not punishment. They are protection. They teach people how to treat you. And when someone refuses to learn, walking away is not cruelty, it is survival. Daniel and I are rebuilding our relationship now, carefully, honestly, without illusions. I love him, but I no longer rescue him. I support growth, not dependence. Sometimes he apologizes again. I tell him to stop. What matters is not how sorry someone sounds. What matters is how they live after they realize the damage they caused. At 69, I learned the most important lesson of my life. Dignity cannot be begged for. Respect cannot be bought. And love that asks you to disappear is not love at all. If my story sounds familiar, if you have ever been asked to shrink yourself to keep someone else comfortable, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not too much. You are not outdated. And you are not wrong for choosing yourself. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say enough and walk away. That is not the end of the story. That is where healing begins. Looking back, I understand now that love should never require silence, humiliation, or self-erasure. For most of my life, I believed being a good mother meant giving endlessly, enduring quietly, and asking for nothing in return. I was wrong. Love without respect slowly destroys both the giver and the receiver. I learned that boundaries are not walls meant to punish others. They are lines drawn to protect the soul. When I finally chose dignity over comfort, I did not lose my family. I lost an illusion. And in its place, I gained clarity, strength, and peace. People may forget your sacrifices, but they will never forget the moment you stop allowing yourself to be mistreated. True love grows only where respect lives, and sometimes the most powerful act of love is having the courage to say enough and walk away.